presenter today.
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Jeff. As Jeff had mentioned, the NGFN is a key initiative of the Wallace Center, and these webinars are really designed as a technical assistance platform to offer you folks expertise, innovation, and experience from around the country. And in that vein, we are really proud to have with us Oran Hesterman today. I think many of you probably know Oran in the various roles that he's played over the years. I personally have known Oran for probably over 20 years and continue to learn from him every time we interact. So I think you'll have quite a bit to learn today. Oran's currently the director and the founder and the director of the Fair Food Network, which is a national organization focused on equitable and sustainable food systems. But in the past, you've also may have known Oran from his roots at Michigan State University as a professor there in agronomy and an extension specialist, where he worked with growers, helping to develop production systems that are more sustainable and helping to create systemic change at the university to move it to embrace more sustainable food systems. From there, you may also know him from his role at W.K. Kellogg Foundation, where he was a program officer with their food systems work there and really was a pioneer in helping the foundation to understand and to be an effective funder, both in integrated farming systems, around production systems, but also moving into market-based change and into some policy work, which I think gave him broad experience and a lot of exposure and interaction with folks across the country, allowing him to have a very solid platform to develop the Fair Food Network. I really just want to thank him for his dedication and his experience and willing to share his thinking with us, something that I think cuts across all of those roles that is evident both in the book and in what you're going to hear today is really the strategic thinking, the underlying strategies that allow us to move this forward and to gain more ground, to reach more people who need good food, to affect more acres that need sustainable production practices, and to offer more communities a thriving rural or a thriving food economy. So with that, let me ask Oran to start his presentation.
John, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I very much appreciate it, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you this afternoon. And I will make some remarks that I hope are brief enough so that we get a chance for some interaction, because I would love to hear what's on your mind and respond to that. I'm going to focus my speaking this afternoon on introducing what I intend and hope to be a new resource for this field, and that is a book, Fair Food, Growing a Healthy, Sustainable Food System for All. A book that I've written based on a lot of the experience that John has just spoken about. And a book that is going to be released actually to bookstores in just about 3 weeks. So it's sort of hot off the press right now. But before I get started with my remarks, I would like to ask Jeff to help me ask you a few questions just so I get a sense of who is there listening today. So Jeff, if you could do that for us, and then I'll continue.
Sure, we've launched the first poll, so feel free, audience members, to vote. Just click any of these choices that apply. We'll close the voting in just a few seconds, so get right on it. Vote now, vote often.
And you'll understand in a minute why I'm asking these questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm going to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we go. All right, there you go.
All right, so it looks to me, oops, okay, what did I do? I've got to go back here. Okay, looks to me that a lot of you have read, most of you have read Omnivore's Dilemma. Food Justice, which is a brand new book out. I wouldn't imagine too many have read that. Okay, well that's great. Gives me an idea of sort of some of the background that some of you have. Thank you. Let's go to the next one, Jeff.
Sure thing. All right. Vote away. In which areas are you currently active in food systems change efforts? And feel free to mark any that apply. Okay, just a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the voting here. All right.
Okay, well, we've got lots of folks then on this call who are currently very active in food systems change efforts. And that gives me a very good idea because we are going to have some conversation about institutional and policy change, which you will hear from my talk and read in the book, if you get a chance to read it, 2 areas that I think are really critical for our future. Okay, so let me start now with a quote. It's actually a quote that's in my book, but not a quote by me. It's a quote by the late scientist and engineer Buckminster Fuller, who said, "You never change things by fighting existing reality. To change things, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." And I love this quote, and I really use it a lot. You heard John talk about how, you know, he and I working together and working with many people over many years have really tried to think more strategically about change in the food system. And I just love this quote by Buckminster Fuller, because what he reminds us to do is that this is not a fight, that we're not about fighting any system. What we're about is actually building a new model of the food system that makes the existing model obsolete. An important step in this movement around fair or good food, as in many movements, has been the work of those who have given us a very clear sense of the problems and challenges inherent in the existing reality. And I think about some of the authors who many of you have read. I think about the great work of Eric Schlosser almost 20 years ago, pointing out the real challenges and problems with primarily our meat and fast food industry. Michael Pollan, who really has woken up a whole generation across his country about the current situation with our food system and that it needs to change. And then more recently, the movie Food Inc. that really helped us see some of the challenges of a food system where so much power and control gets concentrated in the hands of so few, with 80% of all of our meat packing in the hands of just 4 companies, and about 42% of all our retail grocery now in the hands of the largest 4 retail supermarket companies. Food Inc. really helped us see the kinds of challenges that are presented in a system with that kind of concentration. I wrote Fair Food because while it's important to understand what the current reality is, it is time, as John has said so many times in the Good Food Network, it's time for us to focus on solutions and not on the problems. And so I think about some of the new expanding networks of innovation and models that are happening. And these are just examples, just proxies. But if you look at this chart, the number of operating farmers markets in the United States, where just in between 2009 and 2010, a 16% increase. But you look at almost a 4-fold increase from 1994 until today. And I don't know about your community, but in my community and many places I go, we see new farmers markets springing up all the time. A signal to me of the shift that's happening. We could also look at the shift that's happening in terms of SNAP sales at farmers market. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about this in a minute, but you know, there was a dip as we went from food stamps that were literal coupons to our electronic system. But just look at what happened between 2009 and 2010. The huge jump in the amount of SNAP sales, the amount, which basically means a broader swath of consumers are starting to see how to engage in a more local and sustainable food system. Or as a proxy, we can look at the growth of organic sales and how fruits and vegetables are leading the way. Again, I would not look at this and say that this is the change, this embodies all the change we want to see, but I think it's a really good proxy for us to be able to really understand the kind of tipping point that we are starting to move towards in our food system. But it's not just farmers markets and CSA and local food. I also love to look at some of what's happening with the larger companies. And here in Cisco, with their advanced integrated pest management program on almost 900,000 acres in the United States now, they have documented each year since 2006 and up until 2009 a huge decrease in the pounds of active ingredients of pesticides that are not being used that would have been used if they weren't if their farmers and their growers weren't in this program. So another example. But it really goes beyond specific examples. I think about the expanding models that are happening, the networks among networks. So for example, in farm to school, 8 years ago, we could only identify 4 farm to school programs anywhere in the country, only 4. There are now over 10,000 in all 50 states. So another example of the networks of solutions that are starting to happen. Or in college food service, I think about the Real Food Challenge that's working to shift $1 billion of procurement of food purchasing in college and university cafeterias by 2020, which is about 1/5 of all of the food service purchases in college and universities. They now have 3,900 students very active across about 340 campuses throughout the United States. And I harken back, a little story here, I harken back to a time when I was at Kellogg Foundation, and this would have been in about 1997 or 98, and I was on a site visit to a project at Washington State University with one of our trustees, Han Min Liu from San Francisco. And after we visit the Washington State University and some of the work they're doing there, and they're proudly showing us their campus-wide composting facility, we're talking with faculty, administrators, some stakeholders. And on the way back to the hotel, Han Min says, "Oran, I'm surprised. We didn't meet any students when we were there. Where are the students in this movement?" He said, I can't think of a single movement that has succeeded in our lifetimes where college students have not been involved. And at that point, about 13 years ago, I did not have a good answer for him. And I am so pleased that now there are great answers about how college students are getting involved, whether you see it in changes in college courses, the Real Food Challenge, or the number of young people that we see getting involved in this movement all across the country. It is really heartening to me to see that happening. And a great answer 13 years late for that board member, but it's there. Or I think about, with the expanding models, exactly what John was talking about and what Jeff was talking about, the focus at Wallace Center and at USDA on regional food hubs and the kind of work that HUFED is doing. I would be remiss if I didn't mention an innovation that we are working with here at Fair Food Network across the state of Michigan called Double Up Food Bucks. And this is an innovation that's connecting low-income consumers, SNAP consumers, with healthy local food. And the way it works is basically anybody who comes to a farmer's market anywhere in the state of Michigan, a market that has EBT machines, that is, can accept the food stamp card. In Michigan, it's called the Bridge Card. For every dollar they spend of their food stamp money, they get an additional dollar. So you see these Double Up Food Buck tokens. So literally, if they spend $20 of their own federal food assistance money, they will get an additional $20 of money in the form of these tokens to spend. So they can go away with $40 of produce. And you can see that the Double Up Food Bucks can only be used for fruits and vegetables, and actually in Michigan, only used for Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables. So it's our way of thinking about how you use a current system, a current model, to transform the system so that we have some of the current flow of federal dollars through our low-income families actually being used to both transform the way they eat and transform the food system while it's happening. There's a URL at the bottom of that slide, and Jeff tried valiantly to figure out how we could embed the video into this presentation so I could show it to you, but we were not successful. But if you go to the website doubleupfoodbucks.org, you will find about a 4-minute video that's very nicely done that describes this program from the perspective both of low-income consumers and from the perspective of farmers. And if we look at the results very quickly, this is just from our first full year in operation, and this is from the single largest farmers market in Michigan, the Detroit Eastern Market. And if you look at the olive green bars from August, September, and October, that's the amount of SNAP sales in 2009. Once we started the Double Up Food Bucks program in 2010, the orange bars are the amount of SNAP sales in 2010 during those same months. And the dark green bars I call the total amount of purchasing power in that market because we had Double Up Food Bucks. That's the combination of the Double Up Bucks and the SNAP sales. But you can see that there was almost a 400% increase in food assistance buying power in 2010 over the same period in 2009. So anybody who would say these programs, these incentive programs aren't working, ought to take a look at these data. And we're seeing these kind of data all over the country, and I'll talk about a little bit later how we can translate this into some of our policy work. So there are many reasons why I think it's important to be concerned about our food system, and all of us have particular reasons that we're concerned enough to be on a webinar like this or to be reading the kind of books you've been reading. But in my book, I detail some of what I call symptoms of the broken system, from environment to food safety and everything in between. But one that particularly hits me between the eyes is a story. I was at a conference of several months ago where the executive vice president of the largest health food insurance company in the country was speaking. And he says, you know, we've done our research, and our research shows that if current trends continue, by the year 2018, the cost of treating obesity-related illness in the United States will be $345 billion per year. He said that's going to bankrupt our company, and it's going to bankrupt our country. There are lots of reasons to care about creating a healthy and sustainable food system for everybody. But one of the reasons to care is that if that actually happens in 2018, it's going to be difficult for any of us to be able to afford health insurance. And the tax burden on us to pay for health care for those who are uninsured will be unbearable. And that all happens because today we're not doing enough to create the kind of healthy food environments to stem the rising tide of obesity. So it's a reason why all of us need to care about this. I tend to view what's happening in the food system rather than as problems to be solved. Like I don't think obesity, the rise in rates in obesity, is a problem to be solved. I don't think the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is a problem to be solved. I frankly don't think that the unjust treatment of farm workers is a problem to be solved. I think they are all symptoms of a broken food system that needs to be redesigned. That I think it's going to be a very difficult go if we try to solve these one problem at a time, because every time you try to solve one problem, you'll create other unintended consequences. So instead, I think about and have written about in my book how to focus on solutions and solutionaries, a term coined by some graduate students who I met at Tufts University not long ago. They said, we're tired of focusing on problems. We want to focus on solutions and solutionaries. So in my book, I lay out what I say are 4 principles of a fair food system. One of the principles is equity. So making sure that everybody has access and opportunity to a healthy food system. I say diversity is another very important principle. We need to make sure that our food systems are diverse, biologically, economically, and socially. I write about ecological integrity and the importance of making sure that our food system stands up to ecological principles. And finally, economic viability. And what I mean by that is that everybody in the food supply chain is is receiving economic value from that, and there's not exploitation happening in one place to serve another. There are tons of examples of these kinds of principles now being embedded into models all across the country. And you know, I know there are great models right here in my town of Ann Arbor, and there are great models in many places. In my book, I write, for example, about the great Tohono O'odham Community Action Project on the Tohono O'odham Reservation in Arizona, where they are engaging all the way from children to elders, redesigning their food system, and while doing so, addressing the huge health issue of diabetes that has come to that community. Or I look at New Seasons Market in Portland, Oregon, a locally owned and controlled supermarket that has had great success in the Portland area, and some of their greatest success coming in some of the places where it would be least expected, in some of the low-income communities of color where their stores have done very well. And it's a store where, you know, employees get the benefit of ownership, where the business contributes a lot back to the community. So I create lots of, I write about lots of examples in the book of where these principles are being embedded into local projects. But I think most importantly in my book, especially for some of you, is that I really consider this book a how-to guide, a resource. In other words, you know, yes, we can talk about the symptoms of a broken system. It's important for us to understand that it's possible to create a different system because it is actually happening all around us. And I think what's most important is for more of us to actually get engaged in the change process. And if there's one mantra that I keep writing about and talking about, it's that if we are actually going to create a sustainable and healthy food system for all, the most important single action is to make the transition from conscious consumer to engaged citizen. That many of us have read and been told and have talked about the power of voting with our fork and spending our food dollars wisely. And that is all absolutely critical. And at the same time, my belief is it's not going to be enough. That if we are actually out to shift this system and to make the existing model obsolete, we need to do it through both actions we take as consumers in our own kitchens and as actions we take as engaged citizens. So the last 3 chapters of my book are how to become a fair food activist in your home and community, with institutional change, and with changing public policy. And in each of those chapters, I give many examples of how you can shift from conscious consumer to engaged citizens in your home and community through buying clubs. And I talk about the Lummi Island Wild Salmon Buying Club that we created right here in Ann Arbor, where 100 families are now purchasing wild-caught salmon directly from a cooperative of fishermen in the northern parts of Washington State. And I write about Greening of Detroit, that now has this year almost 1,600 community gardens, cultivating over 300 acres within the city limits of Detroit, engaging thousands of young people, both in growing food and in creating entrepreneurship opportunities where they're selling some of the grown in Detroit food at some of the farmers markets in the city. I also write a chapter about institutional change, what it takes to actually shift large institutions. And if any of you are interested in some of the work that I was involved with to help the Kellogg Foundation change over about a 15-year period, from a foundation when I first started there where you could not use the words policy, environment, or sustainable on any document, to the foundation that arguably has become really the leading philanthropy in this area. And the kind of institutional change it takes, the kind of patience it takes, but how to do that, the steps you can take to change institutions. I also talk about institutional change in terms of the Real Food Challenge, where I already said there's about 300 50 campuses involved and almost 4,000 students. But more importantly, for anybody who is listening or anybody who reads my book, I give you very specific steps you can take about how to get involved in the Real Food Challenge. So let's say somebody is interested in starting something on their college campus, but they're not sure how to get started. I give sort of a step-to-step guide about steps you can take, who you can go see, how to get engaged, how to get involved in your campus, and how to connect with the folks at the Real Food Challenge who now have regional technical assistance folks who can help you get started on your campus. In the last chapter of the book, I focus on public policy, because what my belief is and what I write about is that no matter how much we vote differently with our forks, no matter how many of us are shopping at farmers markets or growing gardens, that without change in public policy, it is going to be very difficult to shift the system in the direction toward more health and sustainability. That we are living with a food system that's based on decades of public policy that has driven it in this direction, and it's time to help shift that policy to a new and more positive direction. In that chapter, I cover many aspects of public policy from local to national. For example, I talk about food policy councils. I tell stories of a few food policy councils, how they were generated, and I give you advice or the kind of resources you need to find out if there is a food policy council in your community, and if not, how to start one and who to connect with. I do spend quite a bit of time at in the second to last chapter of the book talking about the Farm Bill, because really in our society, in our country, that is the place where most of direction for the overall food system takes place. I describe in non-policy wonk terminology what the Farm Bill is, how it has shifted over time since it first came into being back in the 30s, and I relay some of my experience while I was at Kellogg Foundation in having funded many organizations trying to shift Farm Bill policy, some of the successes that they had and some of the challenges that they met, hopefully as a way to guide future efforts. We're always going to make mistakes as we do this kind of work. My hope is that we don't repeat mistakes, but we learn from them. And that's one of my interests in writing the book. There's a part of the Farm Bill that I write about where I'm really looking ahead toward the next Farm Bill and where there might be opportunities. I mean, right now, policy making at the federal level is, everybody knows how difficult that is. And especially with the budget situation the way it is, and it's changing day by day. At the same time, I believe there are some trends that have happened even since 2007, the last Farm Bill, that cannot be ignored as trends that are going to help shape the future of farm policy, including in the next Farm Bill. One of them is the food movement, is this movement that we're talking about right now. I'm just seeing it grow by leaps and bounds all over the country. There are more and more people engaged in this issue, and more people asking the question, how can I get involved? How can I get my voice involved? Where can I make a difference in policy? But I also think about more specific kinds of trends, like the increasing power of the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance. So those growers and their associations that grow fruits and vegetables and nuts and other kinds of crops that are not the so-called commodity crops from the years past, and that they are gaining power, and with that power they are going to continue to make some shifts in future farm bills. And if we're thinking about how to get greater access to fresh food for people who have limited access now, our specialty crop producers are key to that. I also think about the increasing trends of public health and healthcare organizations and how they are starting to understand, like the vice president of the health insurance company that I spoke about a few minutes ago, they are starting to understand that this issue of food systems change is their issue, that they are not going to resolve the public health and healthcare issues related to diet solely through trying to shift personal behavior and personal responsibility. It's also about shifting food environments, which means shifting the food system. And I think another trend that we're seeing that bodes well is that right now there are more foundation collaborations and more collaboration among funders around policy and specifically the Farm Bill than we've ever seen before. Two very major ones, one that was even just announced this week that is focusing on progressive issues in the Farm Bill, and then I think about the Convergence Partnership Foundations that are also very keen to help address public policy. So there are foundation collaborations that are also in the forefront now that were not before. And just as a final part on Farm Bill policy, I thought I would just mention some of the specific policies that I believe, and those of us working out Fair Food Network and our partners believe, have a chance to see some shifts in the upcoming Farm Bill. I already mentioned specialty crops, and I think there's a way for those of us in the good food and fair food movement to really focus on some of the specialty crops and how we can work with the Specialty Crop Alliance and some of those organizations, because I think some of our goals are very similar. I think there is an opening for us to create something along the lines of a double up food bucks type healthy incentive program. That there is a lot of room right now for a conversation about how to make our federal programs more efficient and more effective and more cost effective. And this is one way to do it, to use our federal food assistance money in a way that encourages people to make healthier food choices and also has the opportunity to support a local food economy. I think urban food systems is another place. You know, the Healthy Urban Food Enterprise Development, the HUFED project, was one step in the last Farm Bill. And I believe there's openings as more and more urban legislators hear from their constituents that the Farm Bill is important to them. We will have more opportunities for the Farm Bill and USDA to start addressing urban food issues as well as rural. And I also, two others are healthy food finance. I'm sure many of you know about that. But the idea to build a federal model of financial instruments that can be used for creating healthier food outlets in food desert communities, much like Pennsylvania has done with the Fresh Food Financing Initiative. And then finally, the idea of regional food infrastructure, that almost everybody that I've talked to in Washington, whether it's in the administration or on the Hill, really believes now that somehow rebuilding our regional food infrastructure is going to be very important, and that there are actually already authorities at USDA that can be used for that and that are being used for that. But I think there's some room in the upcoming Farm Bill to really focus on this. So as I can say, if you're interested, you can read more in the book because I detail a lot of that. The last chapter of the book is actually a list. It's a sort of a guide of we have put together about a list of about 150 organizations with contact information and categorize them in different ways, whether they primarily relate to somebody looking for an organization around community gardening or what's happening in their community, whether they're looking to engage with an organization involved with institutional change or with public policy or education or conservation. And it's a way for people who are involved, but also people who have not yet been involved in this movement, to find a way to plug in. And we are right now building for the Fair Food Network website sort of a sister site to what's in the book. The book we know is static, and by the time the book is in print, I know it's that part is out of date, the resources section. So we are building a resources section for the Fair Food Network website that will both contain all of the organizations in the book, but also will have an opportunity for people and organizations all around the country to put themselves into this directory. So we start to be able to connect with each other in this way as well. So I want to conclude. There's a couple more questions I want to ask, but before I do that, I just want to conclude this section with a story. A story of engaged citizens 22 years ago actually having an impact that none of us expected. You know, in 1988, it would have been impossible to find a political scientist anywhere predicting the fall of the Berlin Wall. But 1 year later, that's exactly what happened. It surprised everybody. So I think about all of these activists in East Germany struggling under a system that was strangling them, a system that really wanted to change, and each in their own way trying to bring about change in that system. And then in 1989, those same people literally picking up hammers, chisels, and pickaxes and swinging away at the wall, hundreds of them. We will never know which swing of the pickaxe actually took down that wall. But when that wall came down, we know it changed everything geopolitically, both in Europe and around the world. I think about so many people working for food systems change over the last 20 years. And I know many of you are on this webinar right now. You're sitting here listening to me. And I think about how many of us have been working, chipping away at this food system that we also know is not working, another system that wants to change. And just like the Berlin Wall, I don't think any of us really know what the tipping point's going to be, which innovation and which model project is going to really bring about, or which policy is going to bring about a tipping point in this food system. What I'm convinced is that it will happen sooner or later. I wrote this book, Fair Food, so that moment could come sooner and not later. So with that, I also want to let you know that we do have a website that we've created for the book, fairfoodbook.org. You can go there and learn more about the book. There's a video, about an 80-second video trailer you can watch. A place that's got a Q&A with me on there, and some book reviews that we've recently received. And with that, I would like Jeff to turn it back to you to ask a couple of more questions while we also invite questions from those of you who are listening.
Sure thing. The next poll is up. In which area or areas do you need more information or resources to become more active in this work? So mark all that apply.
And Jeff, does everybody know how to get questions to us?
Oh, that's a good point, Oran. You'll need to use the questions box in your control panel, which should be on the extreme right-hand side of your monitor, your screen. If it's collapsed, it may have collapsed, there is a small orange arrow button. You can click that to expand the window, and you can type in your questions in the questions box. Okay, get your last votes in for in which areas do you need more information. We'll close it in just a few seconds. Okay, and if you voted, make sure you ask Oran your questions. Okay, so let's close the voting on this and see what we have. Looks like there's a lot of demand for the public policy.
Do that. Okay, great.
Okay, and let me launch the next poll. This asks what sorts of opportunities or resources would help you to become more active. So mark any that apply, and vote now. I think some people are writing new questions, which is excellent, but don't forget to vote as well. Okay, just a few more seconds to let us know what sorts of opportunities or resources would help you in, to become more active in this work. Okay, I'm going to close the voting. And let's see.
Okay, so let me look at this. Okay, great.
Funding is always a good...
All of us can need more, can use more of. So
That's right.
Surprised there. I would vote for that one too. Actually very interesting to see, I think, for all of us, that connections to organizations active in the field. That's good to see that.
Yeah, that your web resource should be helpful for that. And the National Good Food Network also has a database of people and organizations that you can list your name in the database and share the fact that you're there and available, and you can search the database by state and other means. Okay, John, should we start asking these questions of Oran?
Yeah, I think we should. I think there's a good list of questions, Oran, and a lot of them center around the Double Up food box. So let me ask you to say a little bit more about how prolific are these Double Up pet programs across the country? Is that, is yours specific to Michigan? Are there others? Is there a national program? Something around what do you see eventually coming out of this? How might a national program be created? And there was a question around how you started there in Michigan. What kind of funding started it? So some more information and dimensions around this particular strategy.
Okay, great. So right now, what I like to generically call these projects healthy food incentive projects. And Double Up Food Bucks is sort of the brand we're using in Michigan. I believe in Michigan we're the only state now where we have a common brand across markets all across the state. So right now there are 44 farmers markets in the state of Michigan and 2 actually in Toledo, Ohio, that are all working under the same Double Up Food Bucks brand, so to speak. So when we do communications about it, we can use that brand. The tokens work at any market across the state. If you swipe your bridge card and get tokens at the Eastern Market in Detroit, you can spend them in Grand Rapids or Flint at the market there. A little bit of history behind this program. So when I was at Kellogg Foundation, we funded a grant to Project for Public Spaces, and this was back in, I think, 2005 or 2006. And Project for Public Spaces then did some re-granting, and the purpose of the grant was for them to look at innovation in farmers markets, especially in low-income communities. And there was one farmers market in Tacoma Park, Maryland, that decided to try an incentive program. So they used a little bit of funding to incentivize. If you came and spent $10 of food stamp money, you'd get an extra $2 to spend at the market that day. And we kind of watched that program at Kellogg Foundation, and it seemed to really capture some imagination. Then a few years later, the folks at Wholesome Wave started fundraising to bring together some funds to help these kinds of projects start in other places. So now Wholesome Wave is involved in helping catalyze projects, usually in individual markets or small clusters of markets in several states, including New England states, northeastern states, New England, and Connecticut. They're now working with Georgia Organics to do this in Georgia, a few markets in Florida. They've worked with marketumbrella.org in New Orleans to do it with some markets there, and they're working now with Michael Dimmick and Roots of Change in California to have markets there. So there are we estimate about 200 farmers markets across the country right now that have some form of this kind of incentive. In Michigan, we started just in Detroit, and we started with funding from the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan and Kresge Foundation, their Detroit program. And initially we thought it was going to be a project that was only going to be in Detroit. We were very fortunate in that just after our initial pilot in 2009, that fall, George Soros asked a couple of his foundation folks from New York to come to Michigan because he was interested in bringing some of his resources for basic needs in the state that was hardest hit by this last recession, which was Michigan. And I was invited to a meeting where I described this Double Up Food Bucks project, and a couple of weeks later I was asked the question by his staff whether we were interested in taking this program statewide and what it would cost. So we were very fortunate in that the Open Society Foundations then gave a grant to Fair Food Network that they insisted we match with other funding in order to take it statewide. So we now have about 23 different foundations funding this program statewide across Michigan, and we have funding in place for the next 3 years for the growing seasons or market seasons of 2011, 12, and 13. We also put funding in place for an evaluation, so we're evaluating this project as well as for communications. But another part of the question, John, a very important part of this is that, this is not just a project to do something good in communities with philanthropic dollars. It's really an attempt to demonstrate on a statewide basis the feasibility and effectiveness of monetary incentives to encourage low-income families to spend their food assistance dollars on healthier food while supporting a local food economy. And our evaluation is documenting the shifts in food purchasing behavior based on the incentives. It's documenting the economic impact of the farmers who are at those markets receiving those tokens. And it also is documenting, I should say not documenting, but estimating through economic modeling the ripple effects of these economics to the rural communities that those farmers live in. So our intention is to be able to make a case that with a shift in federal nutrition policy down the road, so that there is this kind of incentive to encourage people to spend some of their federal food dollars on healthier food and locally grown food, we can do 2 or 3 things at the same time. We can help reduce healthcare costs because people are eating healthier. We can help put more money in the pocket of local farmers who are struggling, and we can pump some of that federal food assistance money into the rural communities for job creation and economic well-being in those communities. And we hope to be able to document that not just in Michigan, but with a cluster evaluation that we're doing with the other partners that I just mentioned around the country. Still have you, John?
Sorry, folks, I had my mute on.
Okay.
Thanks for that multi-dimension answer, Oran, and I think that gets to the heart of the questions. Having, your background in funding, this is a particularly good question, I think, that you might be able to provide some advice on. Someone's asking, are there resources out there to help community groups and nonprofits develop funding streams that are part of the solution, creating a new food system? So she says, are there resources to help community groups and NGOs develop funding streams?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a great question and something we need to really think about, because we are at a moment where the funding resources for this work is exploding. I mean, not everybody might see it, but because of the relationships I have and sort of where I've been sitting for the last 20 years, I'm seeing it. The Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems funders, the affinity group, where foundations that are interested in this area come together to learn from each other. It used to be maybe 10 or 12 foundations several years ago. In the year 2000, when that group held its first annual forum to bring these folks together, we were struggling to get 30 people there. When they have their meeting this summer up in Minneapolis, they're probably going to get 200 people there, representing probably over 100 foundations. And I'm hearing it almost weekly that there are new, especially family foundations, interested in this. As the wealth in family foundations turns over generationally, which a lot of them are doing right now, and younger people are starting to be on the boards of these family foundations, many younger people see the issue of food systems change and sustainable food and agriculture as an issue they care about and they want to fund. And they're starting to do this. Now, the specific question of whether there are resources to help people connect with those funds is a great question, and John, something that you and I probably ought to think about doing, about how we actually can, because I don't know of any great resource. You know, there's the Food Systems Funders Group, but that's primarily for other funders, and it really leaves most nonprofits to kind of fend for themselves.
You know, in the past we've done a webinar that exposes the various federal programs that support this work. And being at a new federal budget season, it looks like we're going to do another one of those with some of our partners over there. I mean, so that's one tool, a webinar that's available. It's inadequate for the challenge, but it's one piece.
You know, it might be useful, John, sometime for us to think about a webinar focused specifically on ways to interact with foundations around this issue. So how to frame this issue in ways that foundations understand it.
I do think there needs to be a better bridge between, you know, the foundation community and the community of organizations that are on the front lines, and so I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, but whoever submitted that question, thank you for it. That's a very good question and something that gets me thinking.
An old friend, Oran, I won't mention names, but an old friend we both know. Here's an interesting one that I think speaks to the heart of Fair Food Network. And it says, how should a new food model incorporate issues of fairness for workers? Not just farm workers, it says, but for workers overall. Specifically, most food service workers in the U.S. make poverty-level wages with few benefits, including at universities with sustainable food programs.
Right. No, I agree. And actually, one of the organizations that we're now partnering with and that I've come to know is the Restaurant Opportunities Council out of New York. But they're now, the Rock United is in New York, but there's now a Rock, Michigan that's been created. I don't know if, you know, I might tell this short story, that after 9/11, and the Windows to the World restaurant on the top of the World Trade Center was destroyed, many of the people, the workers in that restaurant who did not lose their lives that day, lost their jobs. But instead of simply looking for a new job that didn't pay well, that had no benefits, that had no provision for sick days, many of those people got together and started working to form the Restaurant Opportunity Center, and they created a worker-owned restaurant in New York called Colors. And that restaurant in the evening serves meals prepared by some of those workers, and during the day that restaurant has become a training center for restaurant workers to help some of the workers from the back of the house be trained to earn better wages in front of the house jobs. At the same time, the Restaurant Opportunity Center is working to both highlight the restaurants and food service organizations that they say are taking the high road, that's their language, the high road, and actually providing living wage jobs and healthcare benefits to their workers, and also making sure that those restaurants that are taking the low road are outed, so to speak, so people know about them. Colors Restaurant is now, or the Restaurant Opportunity Center in Michigan, in Detroit, is now opening this September a Colors Restaurant in Detroit. And we're in conversation with them right now about them creating some kind of a farmer's market or CSA to go along with that restaurant, which is going to be in one of the so-called food desert communities of Detroit, and then us bringing the Double Up Food Bucks project to that setting. So again, you know, it's not going to change the world overnight, but it's another hammer blow. Maybe I'll put it that way.
Yeah. A lot of good questions, Oran, and a lot of questions that really get to some fundamental issues. Here's one that asks about impacting the Farm Bill, and it takes note that there's various aspects to the movement. And the question is how to solidify those groups to have impact on the Farm Bill. You know, the challenges and the lobbyists for other issues seem daunting to individual groups. So the question is, you know, how do you bring it together? And I know you spent significant time on policy and have had some experience with collaborations to inform policy. So maybe a few thoughts there.
Yeah. From my experience in the past, the most important single thing to do to impact policy in this movement is to focus. That we will have more success if we focus on fewer things. You know, I remember the Food and Farm Policy Project and how difficult it was for that project that had a very broad-based collaboration to focus on a few things. And you know, some progress was made, but transformation is only going to happen. I mean, it's a small movement. It's powerful in spirit, but it's not powerful like the lobbies that are present in Washington to maintain the status quo. I mean, the good news is the status quo is crumbling. I mean, there was a article in the Washington Post just yesterday, the online Washington Post, that it looks like Democrats and Republicans in the House are both agreeing that farm subsidies are one of the first things that are going to go in trying to balance the budget. Now, whether they're going to disappear or whether they're going to be heavily reduced, we don't know what's going to happen. But the fact that you have both parties talking about that, it's first that I've ever seen. So transformation, you know, change is going to be possible. Change is going to be possible. But it's only going to work if many, many organizations and people focus. And that's why in the book I tried to say, you know, we can't do everything. I suggested just 4 or 5 things that we should focus on. My belief is, and the reason we're doing this work at Fair Food Network, my belief is the place to focus is on nutrition policy, because it is the single largest flow of funds, and it's the place where we have an opportunity to address equity and sustainability and local food systems and regional food systems at the same time.
Mm-hmm. With a growing interest from the health sector in supporting some major changes, I think.
Yes.
Yep. Next area, Oran, we've got some questions around scaling up. You know, this issue of you know, going from small to large, having how do we address infrastructure issues and things like that. But then the second piece, you know, kind of gets to a more, I guess maybe a debate, and it comes around. I lost my little question here. So the question is around what is your opinion of Walmart becoming a major retailer of organic foods in the U.S. You know, and so and then the questioner kind of looks at both sides of it and says, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So, and the reason I cage that around scaling up is because that's an opportunity for scaling up, but on the other side, it's more of the same system. So right. Maybe some thoughts around that.
Yeah. So here's the way I thought about this for a long time: is that it's never an either or. It's a both and. The challenge we have is that we have a food system that's about 98% highly globalized, highly mechanized, highly chemicalized, and highly concentrated and specialized. And we have about 2% of the system that's more sort of local, sustainable, you know, in that vein. And that's way out of balance. It's way out of balance. So I'm not of the opinion that we should be getting rid of large stores or large companies at all. I think they have a lot to offer. But we need to find ways to bring balance back in. So do I think it's better that Walmart would be carrying organic food at an affordable price for people who want it? Sure, why not? I think that's a great idea. Do I like the idea that, you know, Walmart is working with our First Lady Michelle Obama on the Let's Move campaign to make a commitment to reduce prices of fresh and healthy food so they're more affordable compared to highly processed and high calorie dense foods? Absolutely, I think that's a good thing. If you ask me, do I think that's the fundamental change that's going to shift our system, I'd say no, it's not. That's not, in and of itself, that's not a model, I believe, that's going to shift the system. So while we can nod our heads and say that's a good thing, we have to keep working on rebuilding regional infrastructure. And we have to keep working on making sure that farm workers are getting adequately paid. You know, if it turns out that cheaper food at Walmart means even lower wages for farm workers, I'm not sure we've made a lot of progress. And that's what we have to keep our eye on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good, good. You know, early on in the presentation, you talked about principles and how some of the principles are carried through your book, Oran. So there's a question here that I think maybe gives you a chance to link that to this. It says, what is different in our mindset which will allow the alternative system to emerge in a way that doesn't replicate the foibles of almost all the other human-made systems? So kind of a philosophical question, but really I think does cut back to principles and changing of mindsets.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is principles and changing mindsets, but part of it is really understanding the system. I mean, we have to understand what it looks like. So I write about in the book, and I've spoken about what I call the blind spot of community-based food systems. I think about all of the innovation that has happened in food systems that has started at a community base, and whether it's organic farming, whether it's the health food kind of industry, whether it's farmers markets, all these innovations started at the community level. Yet, if we're not careful, every time as those innovations become successfully translated into a business venture, ultimately that business venture is going to get taken over by a large company. So, you know, I think about Cascadian Farms getting sold to General Mills, or 40% of Stonyfield Farms getting sold to Group Danone, or Ben & Jerry's going to Unilever, or other deals that all of us know about, Odwalla going to Coca-Cola. It's not that anybody's a bad actor here. That's naturally going to happen. So what I write about in the book, and what I believe we have to focus on, is how to structure ownership early on in the innovation stage so that when an innovation is successful, some of the economic value of that success accrues back to the community and doesn't only make other individuals wealthy. I have nothing against entrepreneurs getting wealthy. That's our system. But we can build structures in so that in addition, some of that value, economic value that gets accrued to innovation comes back to the community. And so we're actually experimenting with this at Fair Food Network right now with a model that would have nonprofit organizations investing in new and expanding regional food systems businesses, so that as those businesses are successful and they get sold, which they will, some of the economic value can accrue back to the community through the nonprofit organization, because we do have a structure in nonprofits that does not allow increasing value of the corporation to accrue to any individual. It has to be used for charitable purposes and more innovation in the community.
That's great. It reminds me of a really great book called Community Food Enterprise that was done by the Wallace Center, of all places, that really hones in on that ownership issue as a key principle around sustainable and community-based food systems.
And so in my, even in the chapter that I write about on diversity, I don't just talk about ecological and agronomic diversity. I talk about economic diversity and how important it is that alongside the very large companies in our food system, we also have small companies, small independently owned companies, and we also have enterprises that are owned by the nonprofit sector, so that we do have this opportunity for revenue that gets generated to come back into the sector. And it starts to answer the question from earlier on about funding. We cannot rely on philanthropic dollars forever, and I don't believe we can rely on government funding forever. That at a certain point we have to become very smart as a sector and figure out how we can put ourselves as a sector, as a nonprofit sector, in the revenue stream of the food system, so that we also have the resources we need to keep spurring on innovation.
We've got about time for one more, and I think it's going to be a short one here, Oran. Someone's asking if you're aware of initiatives working with immigrant farmers across the country, and if so, what those look like.
There's actually quite a few projects working with immigrant farmers across the country, and some of them are very locally based, and some of them are more regionally based. But for example, I think of the work that the folks at Tufts University has done with the new immigrant farming program, and Hugh Josephs has been very involved in that program for a long time and is a great resource for that. I know that there are projects that I have been involved with out in Fresno, California, in the Central Valley, where immigrant farmers are working there. I'm trying to come up with.
I know there's some in Florida.
Yeah, is Heifer International, John, still involved with those projects?
I'm not sure. Heifer's done a lot of internal changing these days. I'm not sure where they're at, but I know there's a farm worker group down in Florida on the coast. It's not Lucas Benitez and company. It's not the Immokalee folks, but it's another one that's pretty active, and I think Kellogg Foundation is recently engaged with.
Mm-hmm.
So they're out there. They're out there. Well, with that, let me ask Jeff to take us home and just say a big thank you to you, Oran. I think we've all benefited and look forward to more good information in the book.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with all of you. I much appreciate it, and thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Oran. We're now very anxious for your book to be released so we can dig even deeper. If you go to Amazon.com, you can pre-order the book right now, and there's also a link on the fairfoodbook.org website. This webinar has been recorded. It'll be archived on our website along with the more than 24 other websites we've done in the past. In fact, several of the programs and initiatives that have been discussed on this webinar, like Real Food Challenge, Food Policy Councils, the National Farm to School Network and School Food Focus, USDA funding opportunities, and Community Food Enterprise are all webinars we've done in the past. They're recorded. Go to ngfn.org/webinars. Take some professional development time and use this wonderful resource. We will have this webinar posted within a few business days, so if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, you can tell them to go to ngfn.org/webinars. The webinars are the third Thursday of each month, although this was a bonus webinar. You notice it's not the third Thursday. The next webinar in 2 weeks is on food hubs. A food hub is a centrally located facility with a business management structure facilitating the aggregation, storage, processing, distribution, and or marketing of locally or regionally produced food products. On May 19th, the Wallace Center, along with USDA and some of the most innovative food hub managers, will present all about what Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan on her blog called Incredibly Innovative Business Models, specifically addressing some of our producers' most overwhelming challenges. We're experimenting on this webinar with a slightly different format, and we think it's really dynamite, so sign up. There's also an opportunity to just let us know that you'd like to sign up for either one of these two webinars on the survey that should pop up in your browser. In June, we dig into retail with a focus on serving underserved communities. We're excited to have Fair Food Philly's Executive Director Ann Carlin present her work on determining the best place to replicate her highly successful small market at the Philly Terminal Market, and we'll have a second contrasting story, though we're not able to announce who that is quite yet. Don't miss these upcoming webinars. There are links from ngfn.org/webinars to register. Two of our recent extremely well-attended webinars were on the economics of regional meat. Remember, if you missed them, go to ngfn.org/webinars for our archive. Since this is such a relevant topic to so many of our NGFN webinar attendees, I wanted to point out two items from the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. The Small Meat Processors Business Planning Guidebook is available on the NMPAN website, and they are hosting a webinar on June 2nd on the business side of meat processing. These links will be available on the slides for download, posted along with the webinar recording. Also, you probably got the note-taking template. So ngfn.org/webinars for a larger version of those. And if you are part of a food hub yourself, let us know. The Wallace Center is part of the Food Hub collaboration, studying food hubs across the country to learn how to best support them. Go to bit.ly/myfoodhub. There are a short series of questions just so we know who you are. If you know someone else involved in a food hub, please let them know about this questionnaire. There's also a link to this survey on the front page of the ngfn.org website. Our list of food hubs across the country keeps growing, and we want to know about all of these efforts. You can find the NGFN on YouTube, on Twitter @NGFN, and on our website, ngfn.org. I'd like to encourage you to add your name, interests, your bio, and other information to our growing database of people, organizations, and funders, increasing your ability to connect to people within your regions and across regions. This is all part of the NGFN acting as connector. For the database link on the resources section of our site. And if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage, or you can let us know in the post-webinar survey and we'll sign you up. Please contact us at any time. The email address is contact@ngfn.org. The NGFN would like to thank you for your time today. Once again, let me encourage you to fill out that survey that will open in your web browser in just a moment. And this concludes the webinar. Have a wonderful day.